Hey, welcome to Q&A, where you ask your questions on faith and life, and I do my best to give a biblical perspective. We have a very topical question concerning what's happening here in the nation at the moment regarding the protests around the Treaty Principles Bill. So let me jump in with the question and let's see where we get to. How should Christians respond to the Treaty Principles Bill and specifically the protests around it? If you're outside New Zealand, you're not familiar with this. The Treaty Principles Bill is a bill before Parliament seeking clarification around some aspects of what we call a Treaty of Waitangi, which is one of our founding documents. And its purpose, its place in our country is basically the equivalent of the US Constitution, and we're having these debates around some aspects of it at the moment around these principles that are supposed to guide how we interpret and apply the treaty in our context. And there's some questions that are being asked over a long period of time around the lack of consistency, the lack of objectivity, the lack of fairness, even and equality around the way that this process has been used. And this bill is seeking to have a conversation around tightening that up, and it's causing a lot of protest. People have responded very, very passionately, mostly overwhelmingly, I guess, perhaps in terms of the protest movement. At any rate, they are opposed to this. Now, in regards to your question, how shall we respond? It's a hard one for me in the sense that I'm not really engaged with this process right now, if I'm brutally honest. And I want you to understand it's not because I think it's irrelevant or it's something that's I'm just being dismissive of. My reasons go much deeper than that. The reason I've really not given it a great deal of thought and not really engaging with it is that I think it's a conversation we need to have. I just don't think as a nation we can have it yet. And here's why. I'm of a generation where I remember further back than some of the people in our church today. So I remember, for example, in 2005 with the coalition between Labour and New Zealand First, Winston Peters put up as part of that what I think off the top of my head was called the Treaty Principles Deletion Bill 2005. If you Google it, it will come up in the official parliamentary record and you'll get all the details because it's all been digitized and you will find 100% common to that. But here's basically what was behind it. Winston Peters, like David Seymour today, felt that the way the treaty principles were being used were inconsistent, unfair, and were not really helping advance the plans and purposes that were behind the treaty, and therefore we should abandon them because of the lack of clarity around them. And Labour backed that. And there was, as a consequence, it just died. And here we are having that same conversation again 20 years later. And I find it ironic that the very party that was backing it back 20 years ago is now opposing it. Has their position changed? I don't think so. I think it reflects the nature of politics. Hey, when we do it, it's a good idea. When someone else does it, it's a bad idea. And that's why I don't have confidence and why I'm not really sort of engaging passionately in this conversation at the moment, because I don't think as a country we're in a position to have this conversation, because at the moment key voices are either being excluded or not being heard. Because the way that we have conversations at the moment is not to enter into dialogue, but if the people I disagree with oppose something, by definition, it must be wrong. And the only way that we can get agreement is if you agree with me. And at the moment, the way that our nation is structured and the outworking of divisiveness in society is that people don't have conversations. They have arguments, and the goal is to win their position, not to come to a mutually agreed understanding of something that involves compromise and negotiation. But we need to have this conversation. I think it's just part of figuring ourselves out as a nation as we go forward. How does this document serve us in ways that create unity, that recognizes historic things and allows us to go forward together in ways that build hope and build confidence and recognize and esteem one another as equal to one another. It's a conversation we have to have. I just don't think we're going to have it, and I don't think the way people are responding to this bill is going to create opportunities for that. And the sad thing is, I think that's what David Seymour's trying to do, in my view, is to begin that conversation. So that's why I haven't really given a great deal of thought in terms of how should we respond to the protests around it. I think we need to recognize that the very things that we hold passionately about, other people have contrary views, and they're entitled to feel the opposing passion. I think protests are just the nature of our politics. It's an integral part of our politics. People have the right to voice and to protest views within certain parameters, and I think we should uphold people's rights to protest. Heck, in a few weeks' time, I'm going to be on a protest on Right for Life. I believe passionately in the rights for life, the rights of the unborn child, anti-abortion, and they can't speak for themselves, so I want to add my voice to the growing voice who's seeking to speak for them. I have that right, and I'm going to use it because I believe in this cause. Equally, people believe in other causes that I don't agree with, and they have the right to do that. The issue becomes in how we respond when people exercise that right to protest. I would want to suggest that one way of responding is by stepping back and asking yourself, why are you passionately engaged in whatever it is that pushes your buttons? Maybe you hold a very strong view about these protests, about what they're protesting and why, and how they're going about it. Ask yourself, what's pushing those buttons? Why do I hold that? And the reason I'm suggesting you do that is if you can begin to get to the drivers for your passion, then you begin to understand something of what's driving other people. It's not specifically the issue. There's probably a sense of loss. There's anxiety around what may be perceived as being a loss, taken away, rights that were fought for that are now being removed. There could be all sorts of anxieties, fears, and all misunderstandings that have given rise to that. And if you can identify that, then it allows you to begin to have a conversation around the substantive issues. Now, I don't think as a nation we're ready to have it, but I think one-on-one there are people that are. So that instead of just saying, how dare you, say, well, look, what is it that you're concerned about? And you begin to have meaningful conversations and get down to the root fears and anxieties. Then we can begin to have the types of conversations that build consensus and build unity. I suspect that for most of us, regardless of what side we sit on this particular issue, we'll find that the bill does not say what the media are saying it says. I think it's a lot more nuanced, and I think there'll be things in it that we have picked up on, and that perhaps because it's been popular aren't quite true, and vice versa. So we need to have the conversations that allow us to enter into dialogue together to get to the bottom of things so that we can move forward. As I say, I don't think as a nation we're there, but I think as one-on-ones, I think there's the opportunity to do that. And in the midst of that, I would want to say that we need to remember, if we're going to respond as Christians, you remember Jesus says, for example, in Matthew 7, the measure you use will be used against you. If you don't get down to the personal level and try to understand what's giving rise to the voice, to the passions, the insecurities, the anxieties, all those things, then what's going to happen is you're just going to get into these arguments and this vitriol. And as you push back, they push back. And you shouldn't be surprised at, when people get aggressive and verbal to you, if that's how you respond to them. If you're dismissive of them, then why do you expect them to give you a hearing? They're going to be as dismissive of you as you are of them. That's why I think in Proverbs 15 it says, a gentle answer turns away anger. Hearing people helps us have the conversations that need to be had, particularly around this issue. I also want to say that as Christians, we need to remember that as much as we ought to be engaged in the politics of our nation and the issues of the day, let's never forget that we are citizens of heaven. And so therefore we can't let these things distract us from our calling, which is to live out of the kingdom of heaven and bring it to bear in ways that bring God's grace, God's kingdom to bear in other people's lives. I think the danger, if we just look at the protest as a protest and how people are engaging with that and not getting to the deeper issues is that we can allow ourselves to be drawn in to values and ways of doing things that are the world's and not God's. And remember in Luke 16:15, the ways of the world, what the world honors, what the world values is detestable to God. And so we just become another voice. We don't become, we're not the voice of Christ. We're not the voice of reason. We're not the voice of hope. So in engaging with this, we need to remember we're citizens of heaven and we must respond and engage out of that, not stepping out of that into the things of this world and doing it the world's way. So yeah, that's probably not the most helpful answer, but that's where I'm at the moment. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below and maybe we can learn together. But hey, if you've got questions on faith and life, jump over to slido.com, use the hashtag askhamish. Love to hear from you. But that's it for now. Until next time, God bless.